Thanks. So I am Nisha, and this is my colleague Elaine. We both work at Twilio. And at Twilio, a large part of the documentation is owned by the support team. And customers are the main priority of Twilio. We wouldn't get anything done if we didn't have customers. So we're going to talk about how to better support them through better documentation.
So what is Twilio? Twilio provides APIs so that you can easily integrate voice and SMS into your web or mobile application. We basically sum it up by saying that we power business communication by making it easy to integrate voice, VoIP, and text messaging into the business process and workflow. So why do people write into support? This is something that Nisha is going to talk more about, and what happens when support interacts with customers.
And we both work in support. Sorry, forgot to mention that. So let's start with asking, why do customers even write into support in the first place? So customers will ask about whether your product can do X, Y, or Z function. They will want help when they're using a particular feature of the product. And they'll also tell you when things are broken and they need it to get fixed. So is documentation important at all? Of course, otherwise we wouldn't be here. But why is it important? So we want to ask you to think about documentation as how it provides value to your customer and how it provides value to the company. So customers run into problems when they're trying to build something. They want answers fast. They don't want to wait around to email support and then wait for support to email them back. Documentation can provide a place where all of that information can be found. And from the company perspective, docs provide a consistent answer that's in line with the company message, the brand, and the voice, and all of the marketing speak. So providing docs reduces the active communication burden for the whole company, especially the support team. So this all ties back into documentation is a way that you can manage expectations and maintain a healthy relationship between your customers and the company. Customers will know what they're getting into because they can read about it in advance. And as a company, you're being honest about the features and limitations of your product. So why does it make sense for support to own some of the documentation? From the presentations we've seen so far, it sounds like a lot of companies are having their support team write documentation as well, so that's awesome. But we know traditionally engineers write docs about features, helper libraries, basically the manual of how to use the product. Engineering doesn't necessarily interact with customers once products are live, unless you work at Kevin's company. But support can also own docs that complement engineering docs. So we at Twilio own the controversial topic of FAQs. We provide example code so that customers can get inspired of how to build an SMS app or how to create a call center. And then providing guides and best practices on once you're ramped up with using our API, how do you best use it? What are the optimal ways to use the API? So another thing to point out is that when you're building the docs that support owns, you'll find you don't need to spend a lot of time gathering up topics. Almost every ticket that comes into support can be a Knowledgebase article. And if someone's going to ask that question, there's probably 100 other people who are going to have that same question. So if you're answering something more than once, it should probably be documented. And now I'm going to hand it back to Elaine to talk about the role documentation plays when you're scaling your company.
So as we know, scalability is a huge problem for every growing company. As your company grows, you're going to gain more and more customers. And with more customers, you're going to have more requests being handled by the support team and more questions. So here's kind of like a graph that shows this basic principle. You've got the red shows the increase in customers. And if you're a successful company over time, you see this spike. And the gray shows the increase in tickets. With documentation, we can decrease the rate at which new tickets are received. And so that's why there's less of an increase in growth with the gray slant. Because customers are going to your documentation instead of submitting tickets. And this means that you can also save time. Support team can now handle tickets faster because they're referring customers to documentation They don't have to go into as much detail. If customers are interested in more detail, they can go to your documentation. And your customer or your support team's headcount does not have to increase at the same rate as your customer growth. So this means that the cost per ticket will go down. So scaling your company, you're now scaling your company because you're handling more customers, you're handling more tickets, and you're spending less money per ticket. Knowledge is another problem that many companies face as you're scaling and you're growing quickly. Oftentimes, knowledge gets diffused. So you have your sales team that knows bits and pieces of information as it's working with your customers, your marketing team that knows bits and pieces of information as they're working with the customers. But really, it all serves one purpose. And the goal is that you're helping out your customers and you're relating to your customers. And so we want all this information to live in one place, sort of like an area where the source of all truth lies for the whole company, that everyone can refer to. And once again, as Nisha was mentioning, is really about managing the expectations and keeping everyone on the same page, both your company and your customers. So what we're really creating is a knowledge base, a central place where everyone can point customers to and help customers out with their questions and providing the same clear information. This also provides insurance, so when employees leave and the knowledge is being stored. So how do we do this? We've got a couple of principles that we try to follow. The first thing is to make it easy. I think this is the most important principle because customers want to do the least amount of work to find out what they want to find out, or else they're just going to write into support. And so having your knowledge base and your documentation message the same way that your customers think and speak can be especially helpful. And as Nisha was pointing out earlier, this could be done by turning every support ticket into a knowledge base article because you're using your experiences with how you're interacting with customers and making that something that everyone can see and is exposed. Having some sort of structure, and support often does this because while you're doing tickets, you start relating and connecting all the different types of tickets, and this can easily be bucketed into individual topics that have common interests. And so customers will come and just go to the area that they're focused on. They don't have to worry about all the other information that's irrelevant to them. Having it logical and making it flow the same way that your customers flow through the rest of your product is especially important as well. And so we do this by starting out very general and then going more and more in depth and providing documentation for every step of the way. And as we work with customers, we see the way that customers are flowing by the different types of tickets that they're submitting. And so you can use that same flow into how you're structuring your documentation. If all else fails, you can make it searchable. And for us, a value that we really like to live by is exposing all the information, and having it searchable allows another step for exposing every piece of knowledge and every piece of information to everyone in your community and your users and customers. So just in case the customer doesn't think the same way your support team is thinking or is jumping around a bit more, having it searchable allows your documentation to be more flexible. And lastly, customizing your documentation so that it's personable. In support, every ticket that you write should be very personable and should be relevant to the customer and speak like normal humans speak and just be very natural. And so that's what we try to do with documentation as well. We try to customize it so that if you have a wide range of users, you're writing every article so that it fits the specific user that may be at that point in time within using your product. So what we end up is this two-part documentation / support connection, where documentation is really an investment by your support team for all the known issues by transforming every customer interaction into something that is there and readily available. Documentation takes care of all the existing questions that customers has had, the barriers, the best practices, things that is known and beneficial. And then this frees up time for support to do things that are new. They're able to address new bugs, new problems, new barriers, and new products. As you're constantly rolling out new products and new features, we want to free up the time and bandwidth for support to be able to do more. And if you can do this more with less, even better. And so by following this philosophy, we're also able to be quicker and more honest with our customers about the capabilities and limitations of the product. And this is something that, as we all know, everyone appreciates. And so the goal of implementing these principles is really to empower your customers. This is something that Nisha will talk about. Yeah.
So once you've written up your articles and set up your knowledge base, you want to make sure that customers keep coming back to learn more. So providing a pathway so that customers can find the information on their own. Docs link to related docs, FAQs link to related FAQs. Everyone has a different nomenclature in their company, but basically related content links to more related content to either pique their interest or explain that there's even more information to find. When you answer a support ticket, even if you're going to copy and paste the same thing that's in the FAQ into the email, include the link to say, hey, if you come across this problem again, here's the FAQ link where you can learn more. Write up how-to guides to take customers through an implementation of your product step by step. Best practices guides can show customers tips and tricks to use your products as efficiently as possible, and these are especially great when you're scaling and you're trying to go after more of the enterprise customers. They love how-to guides. So going back to the principle of making things easy to find and making them searchable, remind customers that the docs exist and don't make them have to hunt for the information. So for example, if customers decide to submit a help request form on your website, you can show them a few FAQs before they proceed to email support, and maybe some of those articles will match their topic. Regularly update your knowledge base to include the latest information on your product capabilities and even the known issues and limitations. So, how will you know that you've gotten this to be a successful program? You will find that your customers become doers, as we like to say at Twilio. Customers will trust your documentation as a place where they can find good information. Customers will feel self-sufficient, and they will get into the habit of finding the solution themselves without having to rely on emailing support. And once customers discover the documentation, they are more likely to go back to the docs the next time they have a question. They might even like browsing your docs for fun. So we hope this presentation's given a better understanding of why support should own part of the documentation process and how it can benefit your customers and your company. Is there any questions that we can answer?
It's going to be hard to do the mic. We'll try that. Okay, questions? Oh, got one right here.
Shoot.
So we're doing a similar thing at my company with the support team, and one of the issues we're running into is just making sure that maintenance is done properly, and that we're having a lot of duplicate articles created. How do you guys approach that problem? And knowing, like, do I just revise the current one a little bit to make it kind of like meet the new problem that's kind of the same problem, or do I write a new one?
Okay, so at Twilio, we have kind of like a review cycle that happens every 3 weeks. So there's a couple of us who are super excited about docs more than the rest of the support team. So we go through our existing FAQs and lists of like stuff that we want to put on the site that's new. So that happens every 3 weeks, and then we suggest new articles for people to write. Everyone picks a couple articles and then publishes it within 3 weeks. So it's kind of like a a recurring cycle for us that we just keep maintaining. Anytime that there's a new product launch, we go through the FAQs and make sure what needs to be updated.
I can add on to that and say that the biggest users of all our documentation, whether it's the docs for the developers or the FAQs or any guides, is the support team. Because that's the information you're using to answer tickets. And so as you're reading through any documentation, we really try to make an effort of taking down points and reading through and being like, oh my gosh, like this doesn't work. Like I can't send this to a customer. I better fix it. And so you either fix it now or you submit a bug request or do whatever is necessary. But because we're using the documentation more than anyone else, we're also the best people to be reviewing and revamping the documentation.
So I've got two, I guess. And one is where we draw the line, I guess, would be if it's self-service, it's documentation, and if it's hand-holdy, it's support. And I wonder, do you have a docs team who is actually doing some form of formal documentation, or are you it? And the second thing is support dependency. Because we have a very pretty substantial doc base, and our support team is forever sending out links to the doc base again and again and again. And actually the answers are in the docs very often. So a huge number of our support cases end in sent a link to the docs and then they are closed. And the same customers call support again and ask questions. And it's not because we don't have search in our docs, and it's not because we don't have a table of contents in our docs. But I'm wondering what you think about how to break the cycle of support dependency.
I guess I'll start with the second one first, because it's fresh in my head. But I think one thing that we've done at Twilio is created this culture of this doer mentality. And so this doer mentality really is something that customers experience from the get-go. And what we try to provide is information up front that allows customers to play and get started right away. And you know, it takes about 3 minutes to open an account and send your first SMS message with Twilio. And so providing that sort of flow gets customers used to the idea that they can do more themselves and that it is actually faster and easier if they do it themselves. We make it easy for them, but instead of waiting perhaps 3 hours, they can get the information up front right away. And so that is something that is seen across all products and across every user like cycle and experience that the users are used to. And so that's something that translates across the whole company. And it's kind of like a motto that our founders and CEOs often talks about when they're talking to customers. And so customers have that ingrained in their head.
Do you think that's a scale issue because it is in fact possible to, I mean, I don't know how lightweight your product is in terms of ability to deploy it, whether there is anything like a large enterprise installation of your product. So do you think it's just a scale issue?
I think the support team does a lot in terms of like gauging the customer's temperature and the customer's experience level in using our product. There's very easy ways to implement Twilio, and there's very complicated ways to implement Twilio. So if we're going to respond to them, we never just send them a link and close out the ticket. We'll include the link, but also give like a very detailed explanation of why that link is important, what information we're actually trying to point out in the link, and then just trying to figure out what kind of technical expertise they're at to respond to them properly.
Cool. Next question. Anybody? Upstairs, anybody? Nope. Okay, great.
Yeah.